Hello, my friends. In this video, let's quickly go through data source concept in Godspeed and what are the best practices we bring in Godspeed. Sources are of two kinds. One is an API or a data source. API could be REST, gRPC, SOAP, GraphQL. Data store could be SQL, NoSQL, a cache, a search engine, so on and so forth. Essentially, data sources are places where you store or retrieve data from. When you query your data sources, what are you often doing? You're authenticating, getting your tokens. You're authorizing whether the user is allowed to do it or not. You are validating the request response from an API call, for example. Is the API giving me correct response? And you are also caching your responses on the data source calls. You're looking in cache first. So, and seeing if you find it in cache. All of this, when you write it in a typical Node.js app, requires a lot of boilerplate, right? Give me a Node.js code for accessing a Prisma database table um, search query with caching in Redis using Redis client and retry, sorry, and limiting DB access based on the user role. For example, which rows and columns it can access in a multi-tenant setup. So whenever we write this in pure Node.js code, right, we write all of this boilerplate. We first check in cache. If we don't get in cache, we execute in Prisma. And then this GPT has not done it, then you store it back in it is doing it. It is setting back in cache. And in this, you are limiting database access. It has asked you to implement all of the logic here and so on and so forth. You see, you are doing so much code out here. And if you want to do same thing with an Axios API call, um, but here additionally retry based on status code 500 or 503 and also refresh the authentication token to Axios API uh, when response status is 401. So as you see here, right, it is calling an Axios API. Do you see the amount of boilerplate being written here? Now the same thing in Godspeed can be done without the boilerplate. That's the idea of configure over code and decoupled approach in Godspeed. This helps you in two ways. One, you focus only on the tip of the iceberg. Now, what is the benefit of this thing? When a bug comes, you don't have to look in the entire iceberg to solve the bug. And even when implementing your features, you are only working on this area. This means this area is sorted once and for all by configurations. If there's a bug in configuration, you simply change your configuration once and share it in all your projects across your organization. New developers only write pure business logic. Let's see how this is done in Godspeed. So in Godspeed, for example, caching. Let's look at how you use caching, right? You set up your caching as default cache in your project. And when you are creating an something, Godspeed allows you both YAML TypeScript functions, right? I'm creating a loan application. I've simply written cache. After you create application, cache with this key. Now when I'm getting a loan application, right? When you get a loan application, before you call the DB, look in with this cache. After you call get response from the DB, set with this cache. That's it. You have not imported anything in this. It's pure YAML, right? Okay. So now retries, coming to retries. So I've just simply, when I've set up this API, I've configured that whenever you call this API, status code is this, just retry. Okay, this is my KYC API, type Axios. When you're authenticating, simply authenticate using this function, which will get me the headers. And this is refresh on 401 status code. Now, when you're calling the KYC, like datasource.kyc from anywhere in your code, this is it. I call datasource KYC. I'm calling a post on this URL of that API. I'm simply sending my data. Now the framework, the plugin is still retrying whenever there's a 500 response. Plugin is refreshing the token whenever there's a 401 status code in the response. You don't, as a developer, need to do it anymore. Okay. Tomorrow, even if you replace Axios with another plugin, you only need to change the plugin implementation. Your business logic can remain the same, making you a highly maintainable organization. These are benefits of configure over code and decoupled approach. Now, the data sources, when you use them in Godspeed, you need to do Godspeed plugin add command. When you run Godspeed plugin add, it will show you a list of all plugins that are there. You will select your plugins, install these plugins, okay? And then they will start showing in your types. And then you start configuring different instances of your plugin in YAML files. You could have AWS 1.yaml, 2.yaml. Simply configure your plugin. Here we're using S3 and DynamoDB. We are enabling them. And then you have in-memory cache plugin being created. You have a Kafka plugin being initialized, an instance of Kafka connection. KYC was this Axios API plugin instance. This is a .prisma plugin, okay, of data source. Now you want to access this in your functions. How do you access this in your functions? In YAML functions. Let us first see. In YAML functions, you write data source dot name of data source. And then remaining part is what comes after the name of data source. In this example, Axios is depending on the data source, it changes. So the data source plugin author determines how do you access the data source, which could be you also. Godspeed's default Axios implementation takes the method name and the URL, and you pass data headers and everything in arguments. Okay. When you are now same thing, I'm using in TypeScript. I want to access data sources. So in TypeScript, data sources are available. When you write your TypeScript function, you get a GS context object here. In the context, you have data sources. Now you do data sources dot again name of the data source dot client. After that, you get the client and the native methods of client are exposed there, like S3 API of AWS SDK is available here. Simply here as well, Axios, right? This is context.datasources.lms, which is a type Axios. And herein, I'm calling the Axios API call. These are my methods. This is my URL. This is my data. And these are my headers. And that's it. I'm not doing, as you notice, a retry here. I'm not authenticating my token here. This is how I access this boilerplate free. Even in TypeScript, I'm not doing all of these things. This is pure business logic. Now, when a bug comes, you know you have very small area to look in and solve bug. And chance of introduction of bug is also reduced because now you are writing very less code, pure business logic. Hence, the probability of bug is also reduced. Your time of development is reduced. When a new developer joins your project, they have less things to learn and understand. They will be faster to learn. Whole of your company now will give one standardized output across the organization. No matter which developer comes, all of them will start giving one standard format of development using your data sources, standardization. So this helps in long-term maintainability also. So with these approaches of configure over code and decoupled architecture, by focusing on the tip of the iceberg, you're not only bringing standardization, you are reducing your development time, you are making it easier for young and new developers to join your organization. You are reducing the probability of errors and you are reducing the time to fix your errors. It makes you a 10x organization that way. And Godspeed allows you to use any data sources that you want without limit. Create your own plugins as well by implementing the GS plugin, GS data source interface. Create your own plugins. You are the master crafter. Everything is in documentation. And all the sample data sources also are available in our GitHub repository, GS plugins. You can check out their code. And in the documentation, you can go check out data source plugins. All of these plugins documentation is here. create a custom data source plugin. How to do it? It's here. Go through this, create custom data source. Everything is there. You can go to it. And if you have any questions, just drop in a question on Discord. And if you have any other queries, first check in the documentation, check out our YouTube channel. If they don't solve your queries, then please drop in a question in Discord. Thank you very much for joining in. Check out our other video on data sources for more in-depth coverage of data sources. Thank you very much, my friends. Have a lovely day.